Welcome back everyone. Thanks for joining me today in this video, which we're looking at the 5 main things that you need to consider before you buy a small holding or homesteading property. So the first thing that we're going to look at is access, and this is really important, which is why I've given it prime location here in the video as the number one thing. When you go to look at a property, you need to have a look at the entranceways and gateways on that property. And I don't mean just to the house itself or the farm buildings, if there are any, but I mean to the fields. Do the fields have access onto a road of some sort? And also have a look at the width of those gateways and gates, and also the condition of them. Unfortunately, in the UK, there's been an awful lot of gate thefts, and farmers either won't replace them if they don't have any stock in those fields. And that means that if you're looking to buy that property, you're going to have to stump the cost of buying and fitting a new gate. So gateways and entranceways are important. You need to be able to access your farm and your farm buildings and your land with agricultural equipment. Now, if you're intending to do any sort of arable, vegetable or fruit, you will need to be able to ensure that you can get your equipment through that entranceway. And if you can't, you are going to have to apply to your local authority for permission to either install a new entranceway onto a road or to widen it. You can't just do this. Well, you can, but not legally. And the last thing you want is enforcement. So have a really good look at entrances and driveways. Is there an existing road into the property? An awful lot of rural properties, especially in Cornwall, north of Scotland, Wales, have farm tracks. Now that's all very well and good when you go to view in the summer when everything's dry and it's wonderful. It's a completely different ball game when you go after torrential rain in the winter, or if there's snow, or if there's been a mudslide or whatever, and you're trying to access that property with either your car or a car and trailer or agricultural vehicles. This is especially relevant if there's any sort of slope or gradient. So just be aware of that. It is something to bear in mind. Access also includes the legal side of access. Do you have legal authority, and who else does, to your property? And what we're talking about here is mainly rights of way. Yes, they exist, and easements. Now, an awful lot of rural properties don't have access to mains drainage, and there are easements for septic tanks and septic tank runoffs in other land that does not belong to the person who owns the house that has the septic tank or whatever. Just do your homework and find out if there are any rights of way. We looked at a house in Cornwall that actually had a right of way going right past our kitchen window, and I mean like literally 3 foot away from our kitchen window. We like to be quite private. The last thing I wanted was a group of hikers walking past my kitchen window or bedroom window or whatever, or through my farmyard. This is especially relevant if we have biosecurity measures in force, for example, foot and mouth or avian flu. If people can access your property legally, you've got a problem. So do your homework and have a look at that. Do you have pylons, poles, or power lines that cross your property? If you do, I want you to be aware that at the end of this video, I have given you a little bonus tip telling you how you can make money if a small holding farm or domestic house has these. So when you're buying a property, if you're buying land, you can design and build your own wonderful new house on it. complete with it's facing the direction you want, it's situated exactly where you want on your land, it has the rooms that you want, it's going to have new wiring, new plumbing, new heating, new everything. Not quite the case with an older property. And all older properties are individuals. They all have their own characters and idiosyncrasies. So in this little section, I'm going to look at the two older small holdings that I have owned, which are quite different from each other. So the first one in Cornwall was a 1960s bungalow that was built and only given planning permission because it could take advantage of the fact that it was a farm worker's dwelling attached to the farm next door. And that was the only way that they could get planning permission to put it in the countryside where it was. So in the Cornish house, we inherited non-working electric wall heaters, a warped wood burner as with a back boiler as our only source of heating and hot water. There was no central heating. The electrical installation was okay and the plumbing was okay, but it was a very bare house. So John had to install an LPG, liquid petroleum gas, boiler and central heating system with radiators, which cost us a couple of grand. But because he did the work himself, it saved us an awful lot of money. We then installed a brand new wood burner with a back boiler and put in a secondary central heating system from the wood burner that ran a couple of radiators in the kids' room, which were at one end of the building, and gave us a third tap at the bath and the sink in the kitchen that would allow us to have hot water from the wood burner in the winter without using the LPG system. So we were trying to save money because we had enough wood of our own to run the wood burner. So no insulation in the loft, so that all had to be redone, and we took advantage of a government grant for that, so it cost us £1, I think. And we changed all the double glazing in the house because some of the units were popped, and the age of the units meant we were getting quite a bit of condensation in the house because Cornwall is quite damp. So that is the Cornish house. In France, when we bought this house, which dates back in part to the 1600s, we have had to contend with faulty and dangerous wiring, rotten floors due to plumbing leaks that were never addressed. What else? Leaking pools, woodworm in our gîte, which we've had to treat. No fencing, which cost quite a bit of money and time to put in. So you can see that every house is individual. When you buy a house in France, as part of the buying process, you're giving a dossier. And in that dossier, there are reports on the electrics, whether or not the property has termites, big problem in France, and the gas supply, anything that they find that is untoward. Now, it's kind of like a building survey that you would get in the UK, but it's not exhaustive. And if you do then go ahead and buy the property and then find something out, like we did afterwards, that is not correct, we found that the main wires going into the electric box had been disconnected, and if we'd had a problem with, say, the electric cooker, it could have been a safety risk for us. So it's not exhaustive, but it's an indicator on the state of various things within the property. Nothing wrong if you're looking to buy a small holding in France, an older property in France, nothing wrong with insisting on having an expert out to give you an opinion on that. Not all buyers are keen on this, but you know, it's your money, and if they're not keen, it sounds as if they're trying to cover up a problem and you can walk away. The next major thing you need to be aware of and that you really need to look at when you're viewing a property or prior to viewing a property is water. This is important because you've got to live as a family, you need a water supply to your house, but also you have to either have water if you're going to be growing crops of any sort or fruit, or if you have animals, and you will need a decent supply of water. This will depend on the size of your property, on what you're going to do, and you need to just sit and try and work out what your water needs are going to be, and if there is in the property that you're looking for adequate provision for that. Now, water can come in many different forms. You can have mains water, great, clean, but expensive, especially if you're using this for agricultural use. You might want to look at other methods of getting water for your agricultural use. If you have a well or a borehole existing on the property, fantastic, but how much water do they produce and what is the quality? Do you have water treatment for that water? Because if you're going to be using that in your household or for animals, it needs to be free from bacteria, etc. So lots of things to think about. If there isn't an existing well or borehole and you're thinking of putting one in, please, please, please get estimates. This is incredibly costly, and after you have that fitted, you will still need to treat it. So some wells and boreholes fail over time. You need to get a good idea of whether this is a possibility for you, and if the costs mount up and you're not sure, walk away. There are always more properties. Walk away. Sewage treatment. Most rural properties have septic tanks, certainly in the UK and here in France. Now, more modern properties built from like the 1960s and 70s onwards have either reasonably modern septic tank systems. When we moved to this house in France, we inherited from the last owner a non-conforming septic tank system. We had to install a brand new filter bed and have air vents installed from the septic tank to travel up the house and away. So that was quite costly. We looked around and got a couple of quotes. The difference between them was astronomical, but it's done and we now conform. In the UK, there is a growing emphasis on how waste, sewage waste is treated, and the local authorities, they're all different in the UK, and it depends on whether you're in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland or in England, whether they will also allow you to have filter bed systems. Now, filter bed systems are kind of similar in principle to septic tank filter beds and soakaways. Some local authorities won't allow it. Depends on how much land you have as well. But it is also a good idea if you're thinking about dealing with agricultural water waste. So have a think about that, do your homework. Certainly something to think about when you're viewing a property. Streams, ponds and lakes. Now, it'd be wonderful to have a stream on a property. We looked for ages for a stream on the property before we moved to this. They are like hen's teeth unless you go down the route of water mills or you're in hilly properties that have stream runoffs from the hills. Two ways to look at this. Yes, it's a great thing when the weather's dry and you have a ready supply of water. Not quite such a good thing and a bit of a worry if you have flooding risks. So, you know, you do your homework. Just one final thing about water. If you have streams, ponds or lakes on your property, you need to find out through title searches who has access to the rights of having water. So if you have a stream on your land, can you abstract water from that stream? If you have ponds and lakes, you have the double whammy of who has access to that. Does your water come from elsewhere, run through those ponds and lakes and then run on elsewhere? And do you have a legal responsibility to avoid flooding? Please, please, please do your homework. Speak to your local authorities or to the rivers authorities. In France, this is a major thing. You could own a water mill with a stream and water coming into that, but you may not have access to use that water. Go figure. But look into it. It is one of those things to be aware of. I feel as if this subject on water is never going to be finished. Another thing you really need to consider is recuperating your water or collecting rainwater or grey water in your system. Now, we don't at this time recuperate grey water, which is water from the bath, water from the sinks, water from the washing machine, whatever. We don't do that as yet, but we have plenty of recuperators around the place, and we have an underground water cistern which takes 10,000 litres. So altogether we have 10, 11, 12, about 13,000 litre capacity for collecting and storing rainwater. Now that sounds like an awful lot, but it really isn't. And when you have a drought here in southwest France, you go through it pretty quickly. We're pretty careful what we use it for. I planted young trees in the orchard and they were getting watered late evenings just to settle them in. But unless we get a prolonged drought this summer, I won't be watering them this summer. My kitchen garden needs watered, yes. And what we do is just hose the water from the recuperators into there, or carry it from the other recuperators that are too far away to the vegetable garden and water with a watering can. Really important. If you're running a small holding and you have a considerable amount of cattle or sheep, you'll have a considerable amount of dung and mess, and washing those sheds out, whether you do it once a year, twice a year, just after lambing or calving, whatever, to use mains water or drinking water is such a waste when you could collect that water and use it for sluicing out those areas. Now, a lot of us also, if we have money and we're a big operation, have water treatment systems for sluiced out sewage waste from animal sheds. Most of us don't have that. So you need to think about how you're treating that wastewater. It's like slurry treatment. The done thing in the age was just take it out in a tanker and spray it on the fields when you knew there was rain coming. Nowadays we've got nitrogen issues, and we don't want nitrogen, etc., going down through the soil into the water courses and heading off to the rivers. So just have a think about that. For most smallholders, we're not in that kind of league, but it is something to think about, because water pollution is, gosh, it's in the news every day at the moment, so we need to be aware of it. Thinking about water recuperation again, if you can install your own water system to collect rainwater off a roof, you'll be surprised how much rainwater you can actually harvest if you are in most areas in the UK. Now, obviously, Northern Ireland, Scotland, some parts of Wales will have heavier rainfall than, say, properties in the southeast of England. But have a look at the information is there on the internet, and you can work out the surface area of your roofs and plan to contain water from those. There is a bit in my book, Sustainable Smallholding, which I'll put in the comments below for this video. So we're finally looking at cost, and yes, it is right at the end, because once you've looked at all the other things that I've suggested in this video, I think you'll have more of an awareness of the cost of things and how much it costs to buy and to run a small holding. If you're looking at, for example, water or access, the cost is mounting up. You know how much it's going to cost to put in a water supply. You know how much it's going to cost to run power to the property. You have an idea how much it's going to cost to put a road in. So the additional costs for all these things may make the property that you are looking at a no-go. And okay, that's an issue, but there are more properties out there, and you will eventually find something that is much more suitable for you. Please, 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 if you're going to borrow, do not borrow more than you can afford. And this is from personal experience. I have managed to buy the small holding in Cornwall basically cash with a tiny mortgage, tiny, I mean £20,000 mortgage. And the only reason that I could afford that was that throughout my working life, from the age of 20, I bought my first house at the age of 20. And I bought a house, did it up, sold it, bought a house, did it up, sold it. I reinvested the money that I made back into the next property. By the time I was 43 and had been at the small holding in Cornwall for a couple of years, I had paid off the tiny mortgage that we had, and we were mortgage free. Now, if you're trying to get a mortgage on a property, things are harder now. The company who is going to lend you money wants security, naturally. And the more that you can put down cash as a deposit on that property, the better. However, they're always looking for the property to be worth what they're lending. So you have a bit of a conflict there that you have to manage. Obviously, the more that you can put down cash means that you're going to have less costs and have more chance of being able to secure a mortgage or a bank loan. You may need to provide them with a business plan of what you're going to do, but I would do a business plan anyway, because it shows that you mean what you're talking about when you're looking to either start a business or to run a small holding. You're looking at the costs, you're looking at time scales involved, you're looking at the time that you have available. Now, when we bought our small holding in Cornwall, the plan was that John would get a small job off the property to bring in a little bit of money while I worked on the small holding, bringing it up to scratch and starting a small holding business there. Now, things don't always go to plan, and this is another thing that you need to bear in mind. We had children who were at school, so we had the constraints of dropping off at school, picking up at school, going to after school clubs, taking them to their friend's house, going shopping, the costs involved in that, school trips, you name it. Then my mum sadly developed dementia, and she had to come and live with us. That added to our costs and reduced our available time to spend developing the small holding. So don't assume that things stay static and look at the cost, because these can affect what you can afford to buy. Now, when we bought Cornwall, the property came with 1.2 acres of land, and I can hear people talking to the screen, talking to me through the video saying you cannot make a profit on an acre of land. Well, with an acre of land, for the first 3 years, we made a loss of our property. We were spending more keeping it going than we were deriving from it. And then we had a really good, long, hard look at ourselves and what we were doing, and we diversified. I had already planted some apple trees on there. We had a couple of mature apple trees. And from advice of a friend, we started making cider small scale. Now, we were really lucky. We got lots of help and advice from our local authorities, food hygiene officer, and we started making cider commercially, and it took off from there. John eventually had to return to working on the holding with me because of the situation that we had with my mum, and he developed his own business fixing and repairing garden and agricultural machinery, which again brought in more money, and we were actually starting to make money on the small holding. Move forward some years and the children go off to university, and we're sitting with two really good little businesses based on our small holding, and we're making the money. But we're getting older and the situation has changed, and we either both have to employ staff and get bigger to cope with the demand, or we can stay the same and stay there, or we decide to change tack, and that is when we moved to France. We decided we didn't want to go commercial with the cider. John was already doing 6 days a week doing his machinery and didn't want to work 7 days. We couldn't find anyone who wanted to be trained up as an apprentice. So these decisions, it's part of farming, small holding life, and you have to kind of go with the flow sometimes. So on an acre, just over an acre, we managed to make a good living. Here we are in France. We have 5 acres, of which 4 are acreage that we can either grow stuff on or keep livestock on. And we've got to that age in life that we no longer have to make a profit. And 5 acres is enough for us to be reasonably self-sufficient. As I said in an earlier video, no, we don't make our own coffee. No, we don't grow our own tea. I don't do olive oil or cooking oil. I don't grow wheat to make my own flour. But I am making a contribution and I am living the life that I want to lead. And I'm quite happy with that. If you can afford and you want to buy 20, 30 acres because you want to run sheep, cattle, goats, whatever you want to do, just remember, as well as the initial cost of buying that land, you've got maintenance, you've got to fence it, you've got to repair and maintain the fencing. You have to go and check your stock daily, at least once daily, and then you've got movement if you're bringing them in for calving, for lambing, whatever. All these things, are a reason to think carefully about the acreage that you want. So I hope that I've given you some things to think about there. If you get my book, Sustainable Smallholding, there is lots of information on where to find small holdings. There's even things about how to find a croft. There's stuff about off-grid living. So do have a look at that. It's available on Amazon to buy as either an ebook or a paperback, and there's tons of information in there for you.